Millionaire CEO sees his ex-wife begging to feed little twin girls and changes their life forever. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notification to see more emotional stories like this. The sleek corner office on the 50th floor overlooked a city that seemed to bow at David's feet. Everything in his world came with a price tag: his tailored suits, the sports car waiting in the garage below, the rare artwork adorning his walls. He had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small tech startup into a Fortune 500 company that made headlines on Wall Street. By all outward measures, David Morgan had succeeded beyond imagination. Yet as evening descended and his employees filed out to return to their families, David often remained alone, bathed in the blue light of his computer screen. Success had become his companion, ambition his lover, and work his faithful friend. The space where love once lived had been filled with spreadsheets and quarterly projections. His marriage had dissolved years ago, a casualty of missed anniversaries, forgotten promises, and the relentless pursuit of more. Sometimes, in rare quiet moments, David wondered what had become of Maya. Their separation had been quick, their divorce finalized with the same efficiency he applied to business acquisitions. No children complicated the split, or so he believed. They had gone their separate ways, and David had buried himself deeper in the only relationship that never disappointed him, his company. Rain drummed against the windows of his German luxury sedan as David navigated through downtown traffic. The downpour had intensified by evening, turning the city into a shimmering landscape of reflected neon and headlights. Sheets of water cascaded from rooftops and awnings as pedestrians hurried by with umbrellas tilted against the wind. Through the sleek interior of his car, David watched the urban ballet with detachment, his mind still swimming with figures from the 4-hour meeting he'd just escaped. He loosened his tie with one hand while steering with the other. The board had been impressed with the quarterly projections, but their approval no longer filled the hollow space in his chest like it once had. Success had become routine, expected rather than celebrated. David rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of fatigue pressing down on him. The traffic light ahead turned red, and he brought the car to a smooth stop. What David never imagined was that fate had placed him at this precise intersection, at this exact moment, for a reason that would shatter the careful walls he had built around his heart. Rain drummed against the roof in a soothing rhythm that nearly lulled him into a trance. It was then that something pulled his attention to the sidewalk. A woman stood huddled beneath the partial shelter of a storefront's narrow overhang. Her coat, once decent but now worn thin, clung to her frame. She held a piece of cardboard with writing that had begun to blur in the rain. But what truly caught David's eye were the two small figures pressed against her sides. Two little girls, identical in every way, with tangled hair and faces smudged with city grime. They couldn't have been more than 4 years old. One clutched a tattered stuffed animal while the other held tightly to the woman's coat. Their matching yellow rain boots were cracked and peeling. The woman's hand trembled as she reached out to a passing businessman who quickened his pace and pretended not to see her. The rejection was clearly familiar to her, her shoulders didn't even slump in disappointment anymore. Something about the way she ducked her head, the particular angle of her neck as she bent to whisper reassurance to the girls, sent an electric jolt through David's body. A gesture so achingly familiar that his breath caught in his throat. The traffic light remained red, stretching time into an endless moment. David leaned forward, peering through the rain-streaked window. The woman turned slightly, her profile now visible. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. That curve of cheek, the line of her jaw, memories crashed through the carefully constructed walls of his mind. Impossible thoughts raced through his head as he stared, unable to look away. When she fully turned toward the street, scanning for help from passing cars, their eyes met through the rain and distance. His heart stopped. That face, it couldn't be. Not after all these years. Yet there she stood, thinner, worn by hardship, but unmistakable. The woman he had once vowed to cherish until death. The woman whose absence had left a void he had filled with ambition and acquisition. Time slowed to a crawl as recognition dawned in her eyes too. Her lips parted slightly in shock. One of the little girls tugged at her coat, looking up with a question on her small face, a face that suddenly struck David with a familiarity that shook him to his core. The traffic light turned green, but David didn't move. Cars behind him honked impatiently, their sounds muffled and distant as though coming from another world entirely. All he could see was her face, all he could hear was the thundering of his own heart. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the door handle. Some decisions bypass reason entirely, they come from a place deeper than logic, more primal than calculation. In that moment, the millionaire CEO who measured everything in profit and loss was about to make a choice that no spreadsheet could quantify. If your heart's racing right now, smash that like button. This is just the beginning. David stepped out into the downpour, barely noticing as rain instantly soaked through his $1,000 suit. The honking horns behind him faded to white noise as he moved toward the three figures huddled under the awning. His legs felt weak, his body moving on instinct rather than decision. 10 steps across the sidewalk felt like crossing an ocean. With each step, fragments of memory flashed before him, Maya in a white dress, her eyes shining as they exchanged vows. Maya laughing across the dinner table in their first apartment. Maya's face, tear-streaked, the night he chose a business trip over their anniversary. Maya packing her bags, telling him his company would keep him warm at night since he loved it more than her. The woman looked up as his shadow fell across her. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then fear, then something harder to define. The years had carved lines around her mouth, hollowed her cheeks, and dimmed the light he once found irresistible. But beneath the changes wrought by hardship, she was unmistakably Maya. David. Her voice was barely audible above the drumming rain. He stood frozen, unable to form words. His gaze dropped to the two small girls pressing against her sides. Their matching heart-shaped faces looked up at him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. One clutched a worn rabbit toy, the other sucked her thumb. Both had Maya's delicate nose and his breath caught in his throat, his own hazel eyes. These are. The question died on his lips as understanding crashed through him like a physical blow. Your daughters, Maya whispered, pulling the girls closer as if afraid he might take them away. Sophie and Emma. The world tilted beneath David's feet. Twins. His daughters. The math unfolded rapidly in his mind. They must have been conceived just before the separation. Maya must have discovered her pregnancy after she left. She had raised his children alone all this time, while he had built skyscrapers and signed million-dollar deals, oblivious to their existence. Why didn't you tell me? The words came out harsher than he intended, decades of loss compressed into a single question. Maya flinched. I tried. I called your office 6 times. Your assistant said you were too busy to take personal calls. She swallowed hard. After the 6th time, I stopped trying. One of the girls, Sophie or Emma, he couldn't tell which, began to whimper from the cold. The sound pierced David's heart like nothing in his business world ever had. Without thinking, he shrugged off his raincoat and wrapped it around all 3 of them, his hands trembling. You're soaked, Maya said softly, looking at his drenched shirt now clinging to his chest. It doesn't matter. And suddenly, it didn't. The board meeting, the Asian expansion, the corner office, all of it seemed laughably unimportant compared to the 3 souls before him. Everything was fine for a while, Maya continued, her voice breaking. I had savings, found work. But then the girls got sick last winter. Medical bills piled up. I lost my apartment, then my job. My parents are gone. I had nowhere left to turn. David knelt down to eye level with his daughters. Their small faces regarded him with solemn curiosity. One reached out hesitantly to touch his silk tie. Pretty, she whispered. The simple word from this child, his child, undid him completely. In that moment, the CEO who'd built walls around his heart felt them crumble into dust. My car is right there, he said, pointing to the luxury vehicle still idling at the green light, now causing a minor traffic snarl. Please, come with me. All of you. Where? Maya asked, uncertainty clouding her features. Somewhere warm and dry. Somewhere safe. He reached for the smaller of the twins, who surprisingly came into his arms without protest. Her little body felt so light, so fragile against his chest. "We can figure out the rest later." Maya hesitated only a moment before nodding. With his free arm, David guided them toward his car, sheltering them from the rain as best he could. The child in his arms laid her head against his shoulder, an innocent trust that he had done nothing to earn. As he helped them into his car, the reality of what was happening struck him fully. These weren't strangers he was rescuing from the rain out of charity. This was his family, a family he hadn't known existed until minutes ago. A family that had suffered in poverty while he had everything. The enormity of what he had missed, first steps, first words, countless bedtime stories, threatened to bring him to his knees. But there would be time for regret later. Right now, they needed warmth, food, and safety. Comment below, what would you do if you were David? The emergency room buzzed with activity around them, but David, Maya, and the twins sat in their own private island of tension and unspoken words. A nurse had already examined the girls and taken them for a more thorough checkup, promising to return shortly. Left alone in the waiting area, David and Maya faced each other like strangers who once knew every secret of each other's hearts. "Why here?" Maya finally asked, breaking the heavy silence between them. "Emma has a fever," David replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "And Sophie's cough. I wanted to make sure they are both okay." Maya nodded, her hands fidgeting with the edge of his coat that still draped around her shoulders. "You remembered their names?" "Of course I did," he said softly. "They're my daughters." The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Maya's face, highlighting the toll the years had taken. David tried to reconcile this worn, anxious woman with the vivacious partner he had married. The clock on the wall ticked loudly between them, counting down to a confession David sensed was coming. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I left," Maya began, her eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "I called your office repeatedly. Your assistant always said you were in meetings or overseas." David winced, remembering how he had instructed his staff to shield him from distractions during that period, a category that had apparently included his ex-wife and unborn children. "After a while, my pride wouldn't let me try anymore," she continued. "I thought you had moved on, that you wouldn't want the burden of a family. Your career was always what mattered most." Each word struck David like a physical blow. Not because they were untrue, but because they were painfully accurate. "I had a decent job at first," Maya went on. "My parents helped with the twins when they were newborns. But then Dad died suddenly, and Mom couldn't manage alone. The medical bills from his illness took everything they had. When Mom passed too, it was just me and the girls." David listened, a lump forming in his throat as Maya described her gradual descent into poverty, the series of increasingly desperate jobs, the mounting bills, the eviction notices. She had sold everything of value, including her wedding ring, to keep the twins fed and sheltered. "Last month, when Emma got pneumonia." Maya's voice broke. "The hospital bills finished us. We lost our apartment last week. I've been taking the girls to different shelters each night, but they're always so crowded, and Sophie's asthma gets worse in those places." The thought of his daughter sleeping in crowded shelters while he lounged in his penthouse made David physically ill. He leaned forward, pressing his palms against his eyes. "I should have tried harder to reach you," Maya whispered. "But part of me was afraid you wouldn't care. That you'd think I was just after your money." "And now?" David asked, looking up at her. "Is that what this is about?" Maya met his gaze directly, a flash of her old fire returning. "I didn't know it was you in that car. I would never have." The doors to the examination area swung open then, interrupting her defense. A nurse appeared with the twins, both now wearing paper hospital gowns decorated with cartoon animals. Their faces had been cleaned, and their hair combed into neat pigtails. "Daddy!" Sophie called out, spotting David and running toward him with unexpected enthusiasm. Emma followed more cautiously, but her eyes shone with the same recognition. David froze, overwhelmed by the sound of that word from their lips. He looked questioningly at Maya. I showed them pictures, she admitted quietly. Every night before bed. I told them stories about their father, the good memories. I never wanted them to feel abandoned. As the twins climbed onto his lap, David felt something shift and settle within his chest, a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing suddenly clicking into place. In that sterile hospital waiting room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell and the distant sounds of medical equipment, David realized he had been given something far more precious than all his business successes combined, a chance to become the father these girls had only known through bedtime stories. Share this video if you believe in second chances. Someone needs this story today. Night had settled over the city by the time they arrived at the modest motel on the outskirts of town. The neon vacancy sign cast a soft red glow through the rain-streaked windows of David's car as he parked. The twins had fallen asleep during the drive, exhausted from their medical examination and the emotional whirlwind of the day. David carried Sophie while Maya held Emma, both girls limp with sleep as they were transferred from car to room. The motel wasn't luxurious, nothing like the five-star accommodations David typically frequented on business trips. But it was clean, warm, and, most importantly, safe. After settling the twins on the queen-sized bed, tucking the covers around their tiny bodies, David and Maya stood on opposite sides of the room like cautious animals, unsure of next steps. The gulf between them seemed both vast and paper-thin, years of separation combined with the undeniable bond of their daughters. "I'll sleep in the chair," David said, breaking the awkward silence. He loosened his tie, now dry but hopelessly wrinkled from the earlier downpour. Maya nodded, sinking into the edge of the bed beside the sleeping girls. Her fingers gently stroked Emma's hair, a motherly gesture so natural it made David's chest ache with regret for all he had missed. "The doctor said they'll be fine," she murmured. "Just malnourished and tired." Her voice caught on the words, shame coloring her features. David crossed to the small desk in the corner where he had set his briefcase. The familiar click of the latches sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. From inside, he withdrew a sealed envelope. "I made some calls while you were finishing up with the pediatric Ian," he said, returning to stand before her. "There are for first-class tickets here for a flight tomorrow afternoon." "Back to he paused, correcting himself. "Back to what could be our home." Maya's eyes widened as she stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. "There's also enough cash to get whatever the girls need right away. Clothes, toys, anything." David placed the envelope on the nightstand, then knelt down so their eyes were level. "I want you all to come back with me, Maya." "David, she shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't just step into your life after everything. I was too proud to ask for help when I should have. Too stubborn to keep trying to reach you. I let our daughters suffer because I couldn't swallow my pride. And I was too blind to see what mattered," David countered softly. "Too focused on building an empire to notice I had no one to share it with. We both failed, Maya." A small whimper from Sophie drew their attention. The child had turned in her sleep, one arm flung over her sister in unconscious protection. The sight silenced both adults, a physical reminder of what hung in the balance. "They need stability," Maya whispered after a moment. "A real home." "They need both of us," David replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "And I think I need all of you." Maya's eyes met his, searching for sincerity or calculation. Whatever she saw there made her reach out, tentatively, to touch his hand. They talked through the night in hushed tones as the twins slept peacefully between them. Words of apology flowed into explanations, old wounds were exposed to fresh air, and gradually the conversation shifted from past regrets to future possibilities. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the thin motel curtains, David watched his daughters stirring awake. Sophie's eyes opened first, blinking up at him with innocent trust. Emma followed seconds later, reaching instinctively for her sister's hand before noticing the adults keeping vigil beside them. "Are we going home today?" Sophie asked sleepily. David looked at Maya, who gave him a small, tentative nod. Yes, he answered, his voice thick with emotion. We're all going home. For the first time in years, David Morgan knew what true wealth felt like. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting warm patterns across the living room where Sophie and Emma chased each other, their giggles echoing off the high ceilings. Where once there had been minimalist furniture and stark modern art selected by an interior decorator, now colorful drawings hung in frames, stuffed animals perched on shelves, and a dollhouse occupied prime real estate near the fireplace. David stood in the doorway of his home office, watching his daughters play. He had transformed the space that once served as command central for his business empire into a part-time workspace. The massive executive desk remained, but now half of it held a child-sized table where the twins often colored while he handled the reduced workload he had negotiated with his board of directors. 3 days a week at the office is plenty, he had informed his stunned executive team. I've missed for years of bedtime stories. I don't intend to miss any more. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. The quarterly reports were ready for review. David glanced at the notification, then silenced the device and slipped it into his pocket. The reports could wait until tomorrow. Today was special. Girls, he called, get your shoes on. We need to pick up your mom. The twins abandoned their game immediately, rushing to find their matching sneakers, now designer brands but still adorned with their favorite cartoon characters. David helped Emma with her stubborn laces while Sophie, the more independent of the two, insisted on tying her own. Is Mommy getting another certificate? Sophie asked, her small fingers working diligently at her shoelaces. Even better, David replied. Today she gets her diploma. The drive to the community college took them past the corner where fate had orchestrated their reunion a year earlier. David no longer took the intersection for granted. Each time they passed it, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the rain shower that had delayed him at that red light. Maya was waiting on the campus steps, her graduation cap slightly askew, her face glowing with pride. When she spotted them pulling up, she waved enthusiastically. The business administration degree she clutched represented more than academic achievement. It was the first step in rebuilding her sense of self after years of struggle. David watched as she hurried toward the car, struck by how different she looked from the desperate woman he had encountered in the rain. Her face had filled out, her eyes sparkled with confidence, and her smile came easily now. The twins tumbled out of the backseat to tackle her with hugs, nearly knocking her cap off entirely. Careful with your mom, David laughed, stepping out to steady all three of them. She's an official graduate now. And soon to be the newest junior executive at Morgan Technologies, Maya added, exchanging a meaningful look with David. They had discussed the position at length, her pride initially resisting what she perceived as charity, his insistence that her talent was exactly what the company needed. The board doesn't know what's about to hit them, David said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Ready for dinner? The girls picked your favorite restaurant. Later that evening, after a celebration dinner and putting the twins to bed, David and Maya stood on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city lights. The night air carried the scent of the roses David had planted in containers along the edge, Maya's favorite flowers that she had once mentioned offhandedly during their reconciliation. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped at that light? Maya asked, her voice soft as she leaned against the railing. David slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. I try not to think about it. The universe gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. We both got a second chance, Maya corrected him, resting her head against his shoulder. The girls ask me sometimes about the days when we were poor. They remember more than I realized. What do you tell them? David asked. That sometimes you have to lose everything to find what matters most. She turned in his arms to face him. I was so focused on surviving that I forgot to ask for help. And you were so focused on succeeding that you forgot to live. David nodded, remembering the empty penthouse, the lonely evenings, the achievements that had meant nothing without someone to share them with. The man he had been a year ago seemed like a stranger now, wealthy beyond measure in financial terms but impoverished in every way that mattered. A small sound from inside caught their attention, one of the twins calling out in her sleep. Without hesitation, both parents moved toward the sound, their instincts perfectly aligned. As they checked on the girls, tucking blankets around small shoulders and placing gentle kisses on foreheads, David marveled at how completely his definition of success had changed. His company still thrived, perhaps even more so with his renewed perspective and Maya's fresh insights. But now, success was measured in bedtime stories, weekend adventures, and the healing of old wounds. Sometimes, life doesn't give you warnings, it gives you wake-up calls. And in the end, love is the only currency that matters. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more emotional tales like this.